The rain had been falling since dusk, steady and cold, washing the color out of the forest. Along a narrow trail cut through the pines, a lone ranger truck crept forward, its headlights slicing faintly through the mist. Inside, Ranger Laura Bennett sat behind the wheel, her uniform damp at the shoulders, eyes sharp despite the fatigue of a long shift. A faint hiss of static came from her radio. She adjusted the dial, listening closely. Then a voice, garbled, urgent, broke through the noise. Unit 3. Possible poachers near ridgeline. Repeat. Movement spotted east of. The message dissolved into static. Laura pressed the transmitter. Copy that, I'm en route to ridgeline now. It was the last thing she said before the signal died completely. The radio fell silent. Only the sound of rain and the hum of her engine remained. The road narrowed, twisting through dark timber and fog. Branches scraped against her mirrors. Every few seconds, the headlights flashed across the silver bark of wet trees, a fleeting rhythm of light and shadow. She slowed to a crawl, the tires slipping through deep ruts of mud. Her flashlight flickered once, then dimmed. She tapped it, frowning. It came back weakly, barely enough to pierce the mist. When she stepped out, the air was colder than she expected. The forest around her felt heavy, quiet as if everything had gone still to listen. No wind, no animal calls, not even the whisper of movement. She called out once softly. "This is Ranger Bennett. Anyone out here?" No answer came. Only the drip of water from the branches. She stood still for a long moment, scanning the tree line. Something about the silence felt wrong, not empty, but waiting. The woods seemed to be holding their breath. Laura moved cautiously, her boots sinking into the soft mud with every step. Rain pattered steadily on the canopy above, masking smaller sounds, the snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves. The trail narrowed here, hemmed in by thick pines and moss-covered rocks. She had walked this area many times before, but tonight, something felt different. A glint of metal caught her eye beneath a low branch. She froze. Kneeling to inspect it, she realized too late. A snare trap was set just off the trail, its thin wire loop glinting wetly in the weak light. Before she could pull back, a heavy blow struck the back of her head. Darkness surged. Pain radiated through her skull, and she collapsed to the forest floor, rain mingling with the sting of dirt in her eyes. When consciousness returned, she found herself bound to a tree, wrists raw and aching from the tight rope. Her jacket was soaked through. Her radio, firearm, and utility knife were gone. She tugged at the bindings, testing them tight, unyielding. The rain kept falling, drumming a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Laura's breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to take stock. Then she heard it. Heavy, measured, footfalls approaching from the shadows. They weren't light, like a hiker's steps, nor hurried like a human predator fleeing. Each footfall pressed into the mud with weight that made the ground tremble slightly. She froze, every sense alert. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. Whoever or whatever was out there, she couldn't afford to panic. And then, a shadow moved just beyond the tree line. A figure, massive and broad, slipped silently between the trees. Not human, not any animal she knew. Its presence alone filled the forest with a quiet authority, demanding attention. Laura swallowed hard, feeling the first true pang of fear, but also the faintest spark of awe. The shadow moved again, this time closer, slipping silently between the trees. Laura's eyes strained through the mist, trying to make out its shape. It was enormous, far taller than any human, broad-shouldered, and covered in dark fur that glistened with rain. Then, more shapes appeared behind it, 2 adults and a smaller figure. moving with deliberate coordination, almost as if they shared a silent understanding. The moonlight cut through the branches, catching streaks of silver along the older male's fur. His eyes, a deep amber, scanned the forest before settling on Laura, who remained bound against the tree, her breath caught in her throat. Fear surged, but it was tempered by curiosity. These creatures were unlike anything she had ever seen. They didn't approach with aggression. Instead, they paused, observing. Their movements were deliberate, controlled, cautious, almost intelligent. The adolescent stayed slightly behind the adults, small in comparison but moving with the same careful precision. Occasionally, low rumbling sounds passed between them, words in a language Laura could not understand, but felt in her chest, vibrations of thought, intent, and awareness. Laura forced herself to remain still, careful not to provoke them. She studied their faces. The older male carried the weight of age, with streaks of silver marking experience and scars of past struggles. The female was alert, her posture protective. The young one's curiosity mirrored Laura's own wonder. For a long moment, they simply watched each other, human and forest guardians, separated by species yet bound by cautious understanding. Then the oldest one stepped slightly closer, tilting his head as if considering her carefully. Laura's pulse raced, but her fear ebbed slightly. He wasn't advancing to harm her. Not yet, not ever, perhaps. It was a first glance, a moment of connection, raw and wordless, the beginning of an encounter that would defy everything she thought she knew about the wild. The older Bigfoot lingered near the tree, his amber eyes fixed on Laura. She tensed instinctively, expecting an attack, but none came. Instead, he reached down to the forest floor, selecting a sharp stone with deliberate care. Slowly, carefully, he worked at the ropes binding her wrists. Each movement was precise, almost reverent. When the cord finally gave way, Laura slumped forward, exhausted and soaked to the bone. She braced herself against the tree, her heart hammering in disbelief. She expected anger, aggression, even predation, but all she felt from him was quiet attention. The younger ones approached more cautiously. The adolescent lingered just a few feet away, head cocked, watching Laura with what seemed like concern. The female stayed near the older male, ready to intervene if needed, but her posture was calm, not threatening. From the underbrush, the older Bigfoot collected leaves, folding one into a shallow cup. Water from a recent rain pooled within. With careful hands, he offered it to Laura. Hesitant, she reached out and drank. The water was cold, but refreshing more for the gesture than the taste. Laura's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that these creatures were dangerous, yet every action they took contradicted that belief. They weren't predators here. They were guardians. Their intent was protection, not harm. The adolescent, emboldened by the lack of threat, made a soft, rumbling sound. It wasn't a growl or a shout, more like a hum, a gentle vibration that seemed almost like a human sigh of reassurance. Laura's shoulders eased. She realized that, somehow, this was their way of showing care. She sank to the muddy ground, shivering, and met the older male's gaze. For a moment, there was a silent communication between them. He recognized her fear, her fragility, her humanity, and he chose kindness. In the midst of the rain-soaked forest, a moment unfolded that defied everything she thought she knew. In that quiet, suspended second, she understood the unthinkable truth. These beings, rumored to be monsters, were capable of empathy, understanding, and care. For the first time that night, Laura felt a tentative trust begin to grow, fragile but undeniable. Laura shivered, her soaked jacket clinging to her frame. When she glanced down at her arm, The dried blood from the snare wound made her stomach tighten. The cut was shallow but ragged, raw against her tender skin. She swallowed hard, realizing she would need care, or infection could set in. The older Bigfoot moved deliberately. He collected moss and pieces of bark, kneeling near the fallen tree trunk where the rain had pooled. Laura watched him work with a mixture of awe and disbelief. With hands as careful as a surgeon's, he crushed certain herbs she didn't recognize, blending them with wet moss into a coarse, fragrant paste. When he approached her again, he gently pressed the poultice against her wound. Laura flinched at first, instinctively pulling away. But there was no aggression in his gesture, only intention, careful and precise. The cold wetness stung, but the pain eased slowly under his steady pressure. The fire he had started flickered in the dim light, small but enough to cut through the damp chill. Around it, the tribe gathered, keeping a silent vigil. Their amber eyes glimmered in the firelight, observing her with patient attentiveness. There was no threat in their presence, only quiet guardianship. Laura studied their faces. Each bore marks of survival, scars and streaks of silver fur telling a story of struggle. She realized the world had misunderstood these beings. They were not mindless creatures, but intelligent, emotional, and aware. The older male met her gaze. In that long, silent exchange, Laura felt something stir a connection. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You're not what they say you are." The adolescent chimed in with a soft, comforting hum, as if acknowledging her words. Laura allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning against the tree. The rain continued to fall, but under the shelter of the firelight and the tribe's careful presence, it felt less like a threat and more like a companion. For the first time, she understood. In this forest, kindness could come in forms no human could imagine. And survival wasn't always about strength sometimes. It was about care. Dawn broke softly over the forest, the mist curling between the trees like smoke. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the earth damp and fragrant. Laura sat on a mossy log, her muscles stiff but slowly recovering. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but its warmth lingered, comforting against the chill of the morning air. The Bigfoot tribe watched from a distance, barely visible through the thinning fog. The older male remained closest, his posture protective, eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The female stood slightly behind, her attention divided between Laura and the adolescent, who fidgeted with curiosity. Laura's gaze softened as she noticed the subtle signs of their lives. Marks on the trees, flattened moss where they had rested, and the careful way they moved to avoid disturbing the forest. She realized they had adapted completely to this wilderness, surviving with intelligence and restraint. The adolescent approached cautiously, carrying a few berries in its large, calloused hands. It knelt and set them gently near Laura's pack, retreating immediately without waiting for acknowledgement. The gesture was simple, yet profound, a quiet offering, a small act of connection. Laura swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of the moment. Here were creatures the world feared, rumored to be monsters, yet they had nurtured and protected her through the night. Their presence had been both a shield and a lesson in patience, empathy, and understanding. For a moment, she simply sat, letting the forest breathe around her, letting the tribe's quiet vigilance sink into her bones. The mist rose, lifting like a veil, and in that soft light, she understood the unspoken truth. Kindness could be found in the most unexpected places, and respect could exist between worlds that barely acknowledged each other. Dawn broke softly over the forest, the mist curling between the trees like smoke. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the earth damp and fragrant. Laura sat on a mossy log, her muscles stiff but slowly recovering. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but its warmth lingered, comforting against the chill of the morning air. The Bigfoot tribe watched from a distance, barely visible through the thinning fog. The older male remained closest, his posture protective, eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The female stood slightly behind, her attention divided between Laura and the adolescent, who fidgeted with curiosity. Laura's gaze softened as she noticed the subtle signs of their lives: marks on the trees, flattened moss where they had rested, and the careful way they moved to avoid disturbing the forest. She realized they had adapted completely to this wilderness, surviving with intelligence and restraint. The adolescent approached cautiously, carrying a few berries in its large, calloused hands. It knelt and set them gently near Laura's pack, retreating immediately without waiting for acknowledgement. The gesture was simple, yet profound, a quiet offering, a small act of connection. Laura swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of the moment. Here were creatures the world feared, rumored to be monsters, yet they had nurtured and protected her through the night. Their presence had been both a shield and a lesson in patience, empathy, and understanding. For a moment, she simply sat, letting the forest breathe around her, letting the tribe's quiet vigilance sink into her bones. The mist rose, lifting like a veil, and in that soft light, she understood the unspoken truth. Kindness could be found in the most unexpected places, and respect could exist between worlds that barely acknowledged each other. Laura stepped into the clearing cautiously, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The hunters' voices grew louder, sharper, frustration lacing every syllable. Their rifles were raised, scanning the shadows. Unaware that they were being watched by unseen eyes, the Bigfoot tribe hidden among the trees. She raised her hand slightly, showing no threat, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I'm just tracking a bear. Nothing to see here." Her words carried over the damp forest floor, measured and deliberate, designed to divert attention. The hunters advanced, cursing under their breath. One leveled a rifle toward the dense brush where the tribe was concealed, teeth clenched, eyes narrowed. Laura's pulse pounded. She knew the slightest mistake could provoke disaster. Then, as if sensing her urgency, the older Bigfoot acted. He stepped out from behind the cover, tall and imposing, moving with astonishing speed and precision. The other adults followed, flanking him silently. They did not attack. They did not roar. They simply intervened, their presence a force impossible to ignore. A hunter swung his rifle toward the movement, but the Bigfoot's massive hand deflected it with controlled strength, guiding it harmlessly to the side. Another tried to step forward, but a subtle motion from the older male caused him to stumble, disarmed, without harm. Confusion and fear spread through the humans like wildfire. Laura took a deep breath, urging the hunters back. "Leave. Now. You're trespassing. You're not welcome here." Her voice carried authority, aided by the silent presence of the creatures who had become her protectors. The hunters, overwhelmed and terrified by the unseen power of the forest and its guardians, retreated hastily, rifles abandoned, shouting threats that dissolved into the mist. As silence returned, Laura sank to the forest floor, relief washing over her. The tribe retreated slightly, giving her space. No violence had been necessary. No life had been taken. Only protection had been given. Deliberate, intelligent, and profoundly humane. For the first time, she realized the full scope of what she had witnessed. Not monsters, not threats, but guardians, beings capable of restraint, wisdom, and unthinkable kindness. The forest settled into quiet once more, the echoes of fleeing hunters dissolving into the mist. Laura followed the subtle guidance of the older Bigfoot, stepping carefully over roots and slick moss toward a small creek. Hidden deep within the trees, the water flowed clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones. and the air was tinged with the scent of wet earth and pine. The older male knelt beside the creek, reaching into the shallow current. In his large hands, he held Laura's radio, repaired with strips of bark and sinew, the receiver fully functional again. Without a word, he extended it toward her. She took it, feeling the weight of the gesture, understanding its significance. They wanted her to leave safely, and to carry their secret with her. The adolescent stepped closer, offering a handful of smooth stones, placing them gently near Laura's boots before retreating behind the others. The female remained watchful, yet calm, her amber eyes reflecting a quiet farewell. Laura lowered herself to the muddy bank, kneeling to meet their gaze. She whispered softly, her voice barely audible over the flowing water. "Thank you for everything." The older Bigfoot's eyes lingered on her for a long moment, amber and solemn. Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward the deeper forest, a silent invitation to leave. The adolescent mimicked her gesture in its own way. Hand pressed to chest, a quiet sign of respect and connection. Laura rose slowly, glancing back one final time. The tribe lingered at the edge of the clearing, shadows among shadows. Guardians who existed in the forest as silently as the mist itself. She understood then that she had been given a rare gift: trust, protection, and the chance to return to the human world with a story she could not tell. With the repaired radio in hand and her pack secured, she stepped away from the creek. Each step carried the weight of awe and gratitude. The forest seemed to exhale around her, as if acknowledging the bond that had been formed, however brief, between human and the beings who moved quietly among the trees. Weeks later, Laura returned alone to the forest trail. The morning was calm, sunlight filtering gently through the pine canopy, casting long, soft shadows over the damp earth. The rain had passed, leaving only the fresh scent of pine and moss. She walked slowly, deliberately, as though retracing the steps of a memory she could barely believe. At the base of the tree where she had once been bound, she paused. There, she found a small bundle, smooth stones, carefully arranged, and a collection of herbs, tied together with thin strips of bark. The gift had been left for her, a quiet acknowledgement, a token of the bond that had been formed in the forest. Kneeling, she placed her ranger badge beside it. The gesture felt natural, almost instinctive, a silent conversation across species. She touched the bundle lightly, feeling the weight of both gratitude and reverence. This was more than survival. It was understanding, trust, and the rarest form of kindness. Laura breathed in the scent of the earth, listening to the forest around her. The wind whispered softly through the trees. The creek babbled gently in the distance, and somewhere deep in the shadows, the Bigfoot tribe watched, invisible, patient, and serene. No one would ever know their names. No human story would capture the care, the restraint, the silent guardianship she had witnessed. As she stood and adjusted her pack, she whispered softly, not for anyone to hear, but for herself. They weren't monsters. They were protectors, and they saved me. With each step back toward the trailhead, Laura carried more than the memory of fear or relief. She carried a profound understanding of the forest, that kindness could exist where it was least expected, and that some truths were too delicate to share. The mist rose once again, weaving through the trees, obscuring the world just enough to keep the forest's secrets safe. Laura walked on, knowing she would never forget. The creatures she had met were gone from sight, but their presence lingered, a quiet reminder that compassion sometimes moves in silence, and that the wild holds its guardians in the deepest shadows, where human eyes rarely wander. And so, the forest remained, watching, waiting, and keeping its secret, a truth far older than any story, carried by those who understood the quiet language of care.